Good morning, good afternoon, folks. So today we're going to work on some newels and some handrails for the staircase we have going in the apartment. See, right now we just did our horizontal cut. Now we're going to put it on, do the vertical cut, and this bandsaw makes that work effortlessly. I think it's a 20-inch bandsaw. So 1.5 horsepower is not a lot of horsepower, but it gets the job done. I'd like to have a 3 horsepower unit, but they're expensive, and this is what I got, so this is what I'm going to use. And I'm going to wrap this up pretty soon. And what this allows me to do is to mount it on the ledger. You'll see upstairs, pull out that waste piece, and I just check that for a little bit of flatness there on the cast iron. It looks good. And then going upstairs, what I want to do is just put a backer board on there so we're not putting that newel up against the wall and decompressing the drywall and all that stuff. So you see we've got a little bit of a gap there. I don't like that gap. So what I'm going to do is just take some structural screw, and we're going to put it in, but we're going to put it in a place where it's going to be hidden by the handrail, so you're not going to be able to see it, but we'll drive it right into that stud behind the drywall and right through that mahogany piece that we have. So just using a little Foster bit and getting a nice long drill bit with a flag on the end so I don't go in too deep, but deep enough. And we'll get a nice structural screw, and I like putting wax on there, so wax prevents splitting, especially going through that entire newel. We want to make sure that thing doesn't split, because that would be very expensive. And you can see this one already has the lag bolt in the middle of the newel, and it's already got the hardware on the floor, so it's just a matter of pushing it up. And that hardware I'm using is kind of like like a ramp. So the screw, when you put it into the newel and you put the ramp on the floor, it just kind of guides up until it gets really snug. Just checking things out, making some measurements, making sure everything's nice and even. And here you can see where I'm drilling a hole to put that lag bolt in. So what I do is I just kind of find the center of that newel and just drill away wax again so we don't split the newel, and put this in there. And I should have used an impact driver, but I just wanted my exercise today, get some bicep workout here, and we'll eventually get this lag bolt all the way in, and I want to seat it just close enough so I have that other hardware piece in. And there you can see kind of the ramping mechanism. So we're going to put that ramping mechanism in, 4 screws where we got the lag bolt in there, and you can see it's just going to guide right up. So put it in there and just draw it in with a hammer, and I tell you what, this is a nice solid connection. It's not going anywhere. That's what I use on all my newels going forward now. Works really well. And so we're just kind of straightening things up, making sure everything is nice and plumb. And just give it a little walk around. We've got all the newels up. And you always want to put your newels in first, so that way there you know where your handrails go. And then your handrail placement dictates where your balusters are going to go. So the newels are always first. Put those up before any steps and things of that nature as well, because you don't want the newels sitting on top of steps. Alright, so here we're going to put these Ziploc bolts in the handrails. I really, to be honest with you, I've used this a couple times and I'm not happy with this product. It's just a lot of setup time to kind of use it as an application to have invisible markings and things of that nature. But you still got to fill in holes, you still got to clean things up. It's a lot of the tedious measurements, and to be honest with you, screws work a whole lot better. Just get a narrow gauge screw that's structural, that will hold the strength requirements that you need in case of a fall through in the handrail. But we tried them out again, and this will be the absolute last time you'll be seeing me use them, because as you can see, it requires a fastener to be drilled in as well, precise measurements, and every time you take these on, put them on to kind of align it, you're marking up the newels, marking up the handrails. We will eventually get it in. Right now, just doing the center markings for the zip bolt fastener. and using a center gauge to make sure we were absolutely on center. Test drill hole, and then we're going to use our Fessner tool, Forester bit. Put the final screws in, and get this handrail hung. A lot of it's by feel because you can't really see where the fastener is once you put the handrail over. That's one of the other problems, and it's very tedious with this fine threaded screw that these zip bolts have. And the problem is that what I noticed, if you put a lot of torque on them, they'll strip very easily. They have like a wheel mechanism inside, and it's a very thin gauge nut, and it's not very strong at all. Everything's level, and then going back to the old screws, and this will give it a real solid connection. Put them on the bottom and the top. And these are GRX screws, probably 3.5 inches long. They work really well. The last zip bolt connection you'll ever see on this channel, going in. And just a tight workspace you have to work. It's almost confined workspace. And you can see by daylight changes how long it takes me to thread these things up. And I think this particular one I had to change it out a couple times because it kept breaking due to a lot of torque on it. So we put our handy dandy screws in there for good measure. Top one went in pretty well. Putting this bottom one in. And I forgot to use my wax. And as you can see, I stripped this screw up. So now I get my channel locks. Thank God I was able to get that out without digging for it. So put a new one in. And I tell you, thank God that thing went smooth, because that would have been a lot of rework. I have to make another handle, measure everything again. So thank God that it stripped when it still had a lot of meat left on the stem, so I could pull it out. There, a little walkie around. So it was looking pretty good. And the next step is the handrail from the second floor to the first floor, which we'll put in. As you see, I hung up my handrail brackets. And right now it's just a fact of getting it close enough to the newel to see what kind of measurements I have to do for the angle. And so for this angle, you have an angle going up and then flat, right, from the top down. And then from the side, you got a 45-degree angle. So I cut, 22-degree angles, 22.5. to get that to fit just right. And you can kind of see what I use. It's trial and error really at this point. So I cut it to where I think it needs to be, and I go on the table saw, or I should say the radial arm saw, and cut it down to length. There's a couple trial and errors. We get it close enough. It's like one more cut. Let's see what we got now. Alright, so that looks like a good fit right there. So this is kind of old school. So what we're going to do is just make one final adjustment, lock it into place, and we'll just keep it at this particular spot for the rest of it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to glue these pieces together. So this is just standard wood glue. Get it on real even both sides and be liberal with it. And once I get that in, what I'm going to do is use tape, and I just feel my fingertips to make sure that all the lines are lined up. And the tape's just kind of like a little bit of a security blanket to put around this thing. And trust me, I've done a number of these handrails, and I've had one yet to fail. The glue joint is stronger than the entire piece of wood. So as I'm doing this, you see I'm using my fingertips just to make sure that I'm getting everything nice there, perfect. And I'm just using a wet cloth to kind of get some of the remaining glue off there, so it's not a big old mess pile. And still just using my fingertips to make sure all the joints are nice and straight. I don't care if it takes me a half hour just to make sure that's all good. But once you walk away from it and it dries up, and it's cutting time if it's a mistake. So you just kind of keep your eye on it, make sure everything's lined up. There are no final adjustments after this. Alright, so now we got the first angle in, so that's 22.5-degree angle. And maybe like a 17-degree angle if you look at it vertically as well. Preparing the tape. And that looks like a good fit. The goal is just to get it in there kind of sort of the way we want it. Get some of that excess glue off there so we can see where the joints are. And we want to get a clamp that down really snug. Just kind of go over everything again with your fingertips, make sure every peak and valley angle matches and flush. You don't want to do a lot of sanding. The way you set it up will determine how good the final product's going to be. It's a matter of getting some of that excess glue off. So use that paper towel, dip it in water. I'm going to talk to yourself a little bit, you know. Alright, there we go. Getting it ready to set overnight. Alright, so the overnight setup, taking out the tape, looking pretty good. Now we could use some, sawdust and some glue to kind of clean up those little gaps, those little tiny gaps. That's what I'm going to kind of do now. Won't be able to see a lot of this work, but it's just a little bit of sanding, get rid of some of the high ridges, a little bit of sawdust added with some glue, get that angle looking really good. Bolting it up for the final kind of fit. Make sure everything looks good. Now you're not going to be able to see the bottom one that I glued up because it's off camera, but you get the idea by looking at the top. And right now what I'm just measuring is it at the right length for my balusters. This is an older house, so my handrail length is going to be about 35 inches off the floor. That's off each step, and you're doing it from the leading edge of the step. Modern is about 36 inches. I think codes, I'd have to look it up, but it goes something like 34 to 38. I'm not sure, depending on where you live. But this is a historic house, and I'm just replicating the height of the original staircase in the main house and applying it over here. So I get away with some exceptions. I'm just drawing everything in with screwing it up pretty good. Structurally, this is going to be sound. And with the handrail brackets as well. That's a nice solid connection. You can see it's a lot better doing this than it is using that ziplock mechanism. I have a big old hole in the bottom, and I'd have to deal with that and just getting everything aligned and centered properly. It's just a pain in the butt. Old school is the way to go going forward with this. So now we're just getting undercarriage bracket, and we're just going to put these handrail brackets on, get a little more structural stability. And it's just 2 screws. I'm just using brass screws. And just taking my time hand screwing it in so I don't mark everything up. And what I'm doing also is using wax. You just want to make sure every time you use wax to put a screw in, you follow it up with acetone. Acetone gets rid of the wax, and so it doesn't affect your staining, because you will get blotchy marks if you don't get all the wax out. And another thing is acetone dries really rapidly, so you don't have to worry about, you know, the resin and things coming out of the mahogany and mucking things up again when you go to stain. So as you can see, I'm using some acetone on the bottom there, getting rid of some wax, using it there. And on the newel itself, now you can watch this stuff. I put it on, see how fast it evaporates. Obviously it's time lapse, but it's pretty impressive. It dries really quickly. I'm just giving it a final check over, final walkthrough. So obviously we have to use some sawdust and some glue to get those nail holes and things of that nature, but it's still looking really, really good. I love those brackets, and I love how it goes back into the wall. So it's continuous, and it's got a good profile to it. And that will do it for today. Thanks for watching.